Hello and welcome to the first episode of the News Review. I'm Zoe Kirk-Robinson, and this week's episode, the first of what will be a weekly podcast, vidcast kind of thing, will be all about the massive farce that's going on in the British Parliament at the moment. My goodness, guys, after the Supreme Court decided that it had jurisdiction, that the lower courts decided they didn't, it decided that it could try a case about prorogation. Can the Prime Minister, under the circumstances that were put to the court, prorogue Parliament? And a lot of people, especially on the left and especially Remainers, have been saying that the courts have decided that the Prime Minister lied to the Queen in order to get prorogation. But if you actually look at the Supreme Court judgment, it's one of the few things that they didn't actually talk about. They've talked about a fair amount of stuff, but this claim of lying to the Queen, it's nowhere in there. It's not something that the court ruled on. So we can put that straight aside. I know that Remainers won't, but we can put it aside. And here's the thing. The court decided that it wasn't right and it was unlawful for the Prime Minister to have prorogued Parliament under the circumstances that were given, and the courts, I'm pretty sure, are wrong. Here's the thing. The Supreme Court decided that it had jurisdiction and that it could rule. The lower courts didn't, and it all comes down to one thing. Article 9 of the Bill of Rights 1688. And in that, because I know everyone knows the Bill of Rights off by heart, it's something that we're all taught. Yeah, I know we're not. It's something that we should all be taught in school, but we're not. But the Bill of Rights is where an awful lot of the way Parliament works is codified. It's part of the British written constitution, part of the unwritten constitution, because Britain has this rule, and it's a rule that Britain sticks to diligently. Anything that Britain does has to be confusing and counterintuitive. So we have an unwritten constitution with written parts, and some of those written parts are conventions, some of them aren't, some of them are laws, some of them aren't, and it's really, really silly, but the Bill of Rights is a law. It's part of the Constitution, and Article 9 in that says that the courts cannot rule on the proceedings of Parliament. Now that is important, because here's the thing. The lower courts basically recognise that they can't rule on a matter of political decision-making because it's a part of Parliament. It's a proceeding of Parliament. The Supreme Court decided that proroguing Parliament wasn't a proceeding of Parliament, and I can't for the life of me work out what they were thinking there, because the Queen, as the Queen in Parliament, as the Crown, the part of Parliament that gives its ability to make laws and sign them, because you have to get roll in the Senate and all that, is a function of Parliament. If the Queen decides to prorogue Parliament, that's part of the actions of the Queen in Parliament, and is therefore a proceeding of Parliament. Surely that the one flows from the other. Surely that's how it works. But the law lords, as they used to be, which ironically, if Tony Blair hadn't created the Supreme Court from the law lords, wouldn't have been able to sit and decide on prorogation, because they would have been prorogued along with the rest of Parliament. But these Supreme Court justices, they decided that, nope, the Queen in Parliament, proroguing Parliament, wasn't a proceeding of Parliament. Well, what is it? This is what I can't work out, and it doesn't really make an awful lot of sense in their decisions. They try very hard to get around the fact that they're essentially just ignoring Article 9 of the Bill of Rights. But if the process of proroguing Parliament, something that used to happen every single year, so that one parliamentary session could end and a Queen's speech could happen at the state opening of Parliament and another parliamentary session could happen, that used to happen every year. If that is not a proceeding of Parliament, what is it? And I'd love to hear your ideas about that, because please leave them in the comments section below, because I don't know what it is. If that's not a proceeding of Parliament, then what is it? Is that an act of the monarchy? Because if it is the act of the monarchy, then the Supreme Court can't rule on that, because they get their ability to enforce the law from the Queen. So how can they try the actions of the Queen? Or if it's not that, then what is it? Because it's the Queen who decides to prorogue Parliament on the advice of the Prime Minister. So are they saying it's a prime ministerial act? Because the Queen does it on the advice of the Prime Minister. So it's very difficult to get around what they're actually thinking when they decided to do this. And that, to me, is the crux of the problem that we're in now, because this is essentially a constitutional crisis. And I don't use those terms willy-nilly the way that the media have been and a few others have been doing. This is a constitutional crisis because it's a fundamental part of the Constitution that is being altered or misinterpreted, or, and let's give them the benefit of the doubt, let's say they were right. If they were right, then surely since the 17th century, everyone else has been wrong. Now, that is a possibility. Back in the 90s, the Crown against Brown. Now, that was a significant thing with the proceedings at the time, the Crown against Brown, where they decided that the rule on rape inside a marriage had been wrong for 100 years or more. And after that, the previous decisions were just deemed to be bad law. And now a husband can rape his wife. That was the result of Crown against Brown. And it's a significant change to the law, but I think it was the right one. So it is a possibility, and we do have precedent, as you can see from Crown against Brown, that there is a way where we can decide, actually, no, previously it was all bad law and it was wrong, and that was never the law, and this is the law now. That's possibility, and it is judge-made law, so there are precedents for judges to actually create law. Never had a problem with that, well, to a certain extent. I think it is a bit of an issue that we could have a debate on, but if that is the case here, what is the justification? Because there's got to be a justification for saying, no, everyone else was wrong, this is what's right. And we haven't really seen that, and that is a big problem that we have to face now in the UK. So, as a result, we've got Parliament back, which, yay! The biggest issue with Parliament at the moment is they've spent 2 days now shouting at each other and getting nothing done. What has been done, aside from one thing that's been done? Parliament's decided that there won't be an adjournment in order for the Conservative Party MPs to go to the Conservative Party conference. Everyone else has had their conference. Actually, no, that's not true. I think Change UK haven't had their conference, but given that Change UK is pretty much irrelevant, I'm not really going to complain about that too much, but technically they should have time off to go and have their conference if they want it. No one's going to care. Do it in a lunch hour, whatever. But Tory MPs now can't go to the Tory conference unless they want to risk the opposition using the fact that they're not there to try and pass some legislation under emergency orders or whatever. There are ways that the opposition can try and pass laws when the government's not there. So it's a bit of an issue for them. And it's not right. Labour's had their conference, Lib Dems have had their conference, they've got to have their sound bites and go all over the news, but the Tories aren't. That's just vindictive in my view. So that's really the only thing that's come out of Parliament, aside from Geoffrey Cox doing an amazing speech where he just lays into the Remainers and the problem with Parliament. We've essentially got, once again, the Rump Parliament trying to stretch itself out into the never-ending Parliament. Oh my goodness, it is reminiscent of the Civil War, where the Parliament decided to try and extend itself into infinity and just keep going and wasting everyone's time. And then Cromwell comes in and says, "You have sat too long for all the good that you have been doing. Depart, I say, and let us have done with you. In the name of God, go." We are at that point now, and Geoffrey Cox is doing a bombastic attack on the Remainers who won't face the electorate. Now, I am a Brexiteer. I'll give you that straight off. I voted Leave, I campaigned for Leave, I supported Leave all the way through. I knew from the start of the referendum process that I wanted to vote Leave because I've studied EU law, I've seen what the EU's done, and it's not right. The whole thing was built on a lie as far as I'm concerned, because back in the 70s, we were all told we were entering a trading bloc. There was no possibility of that coming up at the time for it to turn into a country, but that's what we've got. We've essentially got a nation that's trying to form itself out of trade regulations and international treaties. And let's face it, the way that the EU was set up, if that's how you can set up a country just by deciding that you're going to do it, which is essentially what they did. I mean, we're going to have a new country, yay! Well, Why don't we all do that? I'm going to start a country now. I'm going to call it Colandia. It's from my nation states nation. I created a nation on the old web game Nation States. And now, because if the EU can do it, we all might as well do it. I'm going to make that country real. So, I am now Queen of Colandia. I'm not going to call myself Queen Zoe because there hasn't been a Queen Zoe since like the Bronze Age in ancient Greece. So I'll be Queen Catherine. We'll go for my middle name. And my crown will be this hat. There you go. I now have a straw hat as a crown because apparently you can just do whatever you want. If the EU can form a country out of trade laws, we can do what we want. My royal staff will be this this grasping thing here because I am grasping power. See what I did there? Hi. So yeah, I now have my own country. I've decided because if the EU is a legitimate country, then so is Colandia. Colandia. We're just as legitimate as the EU. So we were brought into the EU as it is now, wasn't then, but we were brought into this European project on a pack of lies. And the moment that we've tried to leave, the people that love the EU, they're all saying, oh, you can't leave, we've all got to stay. We're going to try and thwart every single possibility of you actually getting out. That is not good to me. I am very much in favour of, if you've had a referendum where you said that the government will implement what you decide, and then you don't implement what you decide, well, that's not very good for democracy, is it? I lose my faith in the parliamentary process at that point. I don't like saying that because I think Parliament is one of the best things that's ever happened in the world. It's democracy. Modern democracy is great, but not when it's this Parliament thwarting every attempt by the government to fulfil a promise in a manifesto when 80% of the people in that Parliament stood on a manifesto that said, we will respect the result of the referendum. To me, that's no good. And then what else did Parliament do? Oh, apparently it's not right for the Attorney General, Geoffrey Cox, to call parliamentarians turkeys. Well, I'm sorry, but they are turkeys, and Christmas is coming. But anyway, I am now ranting. This is a first of what I hope will become a proper in-depth look at the news, but I wanted to get out there and get started because the Tory conference is coming up next week, regardless of what happens in Parliament. Those of us who aren't in Parliament will be at the Tory conference, and I'll have some more news and updates for you from that. But for now, that really is all we've got time for this week. This is an introductory episode. I hope you liked it. I'm sorry that we have had some issues with the camera. I'm pretty sure we're having issues with the camera as I say this, because this is just basically just trying it out and getting set up and getting there. We'll sort the camera issues out for the next episode, but thank you for joining us. Until next time, I hope you have a good day. Remember to click the like button and share this so that it really does help the channel if you do, and people can see what we've got going about us. Anyway, until next time, thanks very much. This has been the News Review. We're going to give today's news 8 out of 10. Very newsy. But until next time, see you later. If you liked today's video, please consider supporting me on Patreon. Thank you.